The sun dipped low behind the jagged mountains, casting long shadows over the young rancher's modest homestead. Jacob had inherited the ranch after his father's sudden death, leaving him alone to manage debts, livestock, and the relentless labor that came with it. That evening, he sat on the wooden porch, staring at the horizon, his hands rough and calloused, yet trembling slightly. He had always dreamed of a peaceful life, but whispers of mockery from the neighboring ranchers followed him like dark clouds. The local ranchers didn't respect Jacob. They laughed at his small herd, called him inexperienced, and even mocked his late father's legacy. Earlier that week, a group had come riding up, their boots thudding against the earth, and openly humiliated him in front of his few workers. Jacob had clenched his jaw, fighting back tears as insults pierced his pride like sharpened knives. He wondered if standing up for himself would make matters worse, yet he felt an unyielding fire burning inside him. Inside the modest cabin, Jacob's younger sister, Emma, tried to offer comfort. "They don't define you, Jacob," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Her voice carried a softness he desperately needed, yet even her comforting words couldn't erase the sting of public ridicule. He sank into a chair, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders, feeling utterly powerless against the ridicule that consumed the valley. By dawn the next day, Jacob returned to the fields, his heart heavy but resolute. He tended the livestock, repaired fences, and worked tirelessly as if to prove to himself that strength could be measured by perseverance, not by others' approval. Sweat mingled with dirt on his face, yet the memory of mockery gnawed at him, reminding him of how far he was from earning respect in this unforgiving land. The middle of the week brought more challenges. A sudden storm tore through the valley, flooding part of his pasture and leaving several cattle trapped. Jacob fought the rising water, his hands blistered and clothes soaked, yet still, he felt a gnawing loneliness. It was in those quiet, desperate moments that he realized how thin the line was between survival and failure. His sister helped where she could, but even Emma's bravery could not shield him from the world's harsh judgment. One evening, while mending a torn fence, Jacob noticed a lone figure approaching through the twilight. A young widow named Lila, with sorrow etched in her eyes, had wandered onto his property seeking shelter. She explained her plight quietly, mentioning her farm had been raided and destroyed. Jacob, though wary, offered her food and a place by the fire, his heart softened by empathy even as his own burdens weighed him down. That night, sitting beside the fireplace, Jacob listened to Lila's story. Her loss mirrored his own in a strange way, both had loved and lost, both had been judged unfairly. They spoke softly of dreams interrupted by cruelty, and for a fleeting moment, the humiliation Jacob endured seemed distant, replaced by shared understanding. In her presence, he found a fragile peace, a small light amid the shadows of his troubled life. But peace was short-lived. The very next day, the same group of mocking ranchers returned, this time attempting to seize part of Jacob's herd. Their laughter rang cruelly across the fields as they rode with arrogance, thinking him weak and isolated. Jacob's chest tightened, but he refused to show fear. Instead, he met their gaze, his mind racing for a solution, knowing confrontation was inevitable. Jacob's strategy wasn't brute force. He had spent the week quietly repairing fences, reinforcing gates, and ensuring the cattle were safe. As the bullies approached, he calmly guided the herd to a higher ground, where the terrain favored him. Though their laughter was still audible, he felt a subtle shift within himself, an awakening courage that had been buried under layers of humiliation. Lila watched from a distance, worry etched across her face. She had come to trust Jacob's resilience, even admiring it quietly, and now she hoped he could stand firm against the ridicule that had haunted him for so long. Her presence, silent yet reassuring, reminded him that courage was not about facing adversity alone, but about knowing someone believed in you despite the world's cruelty. As the sun reached its zenith, the ranchers mocked him one last time, attempting to rush forward and scatter his herd. But Jacob had anticipated their every move. With strategic skill, he maneuvered the animals to a safe enclosure while avoiding confrontation, proving, if not to them, at least to himself, that strength came from wisdom and patience, not brute force. The mockers, frustrated and humiliated in their own way, rode off, sneering but failing to break Jacob's spirit. The young rancher felt a subtle pride, knowing that this was only the beginning of reclaiming his dignity. In that moment, the emotional weight of the past week began to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of determination and self-respect that had nothing to do with others' opinions. Night fell, and the valley quieted. Jacob sat by the fire with Lila and Emma, sharing a humble meal. The firelight danced across their faces, and for the first time in days, laughter, soft, tentative laughter, filled the cabin. The bonds of trust, empathy, and shared struggle were forming, signaling that even amid humiliation, human connection could offer the most profound solace. But the peace was deceptive. Unknown to Jacob, word of his defiance had spread throughout the nearby territories. Among those who heard, a force was mobilizing, not for ridicule, but for something far more formidable. The valley, which had seemed so empty and threatening, was about to become the stage for an event Jacob could not yet imagine, a test of courage that would exceed anything he had faced before. And so, as part 1 closes, Jacob lay awake that night, unaware that the dawn would bring not mockery, but the arrival of hundreds of determined warriors. His courage, empathy, and careful planning had planted the seeds of a confrontation far greater than he had anticipated, one that would challenge the very essence of his strength, his heart, and the future of his ranch. At the first light of dawn, Jacob stirred, unaware of the rumble outside. The valley, usually calm, was filled with an eerie hum, hoofbeats pounding in unison. Squinting toward the horizon, he saw hundreds of warriors approaching, riding with disciplined precision. His heart raced, and a cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach. Memories of humiliation flashed, but this was no jest. These were not his usual tormentors, this was something far larger, powerful, and terrifying. Emma gasped, clutching Lila's arm. "Jacob, they're coming for us," she whispered, voice trembling. Lila, calm yet resolute, stepped forward. "No, Jacob. They're coming because of you. You've earned their respect." Jacob frowned, unsure how mockery from last week could have transformed into such a formidable show of force. The warriors drew closer, their banners raised, and suddenly, the valley seemed smaller, filled with shadows and tension. The lead rider, a towering figure draped in feathers and beads, reined in his horse near Jacob's gate. His gaze was piercing, yet not hostile. "Jacob," he called out in a voice that carried across the field, "we've heard of your courage and fairness. We come not to harm, but to honor what you've done." Confusion washed over Jacob. Could this be real? After all the ridicule and scorn, the very people he feared were here to recognize him. The warriors dismounted, approaching the homestead with precision and purpose. Some carried gifts, handcrafted tools, finely woven blankets, and symbols of respect from distant tribes. Jacob's mouth went dry. He had never imagined such recognition, especially from those whose lives had once seemed completely disconnected from his own. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes sparkling with pride. One of the older warriors stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Your fairness, your defense of the weak, and your integrity have reached us. We cannot allow ridicule to go unpunished. Last week's humiliation, it has been avenged by your patience and courage." Jacob blinked, struggling to process the paradox of fear turning into admiration. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Vindication arrived not through anger, but through honor. The tension in the valley melted into an unexpected celebration. Horses neighed and stomped the earth, children of the warriors giggling as they approached Jacob's homestead. Emma's eyes filled with tears, joy replacing fear. Jacob finally allowed himself to breathe fully, understanding that respect, unlike mockery, cannot be forced, it must be earned, and sometimes the universe has its own way of delivering it. Lila stepped closer, resting a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You didn't fight with anger, Jacob. You fought with patience, with heart. That's why they came." Jacob nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. This was more than just a victory for the ranch, it was a triumph of character, of steadfastness, and the unseen strength of doing what is right even when no one is watching. The warriors joined him around the fire later that day, sharing stories, food, and laughter. They spoke of distant lands, of trials overcome, and of the value of honor. Jacob, once humiliated and isolated, now felt a sense of belonging that surpassed simple recognition. He realized that true courage was not in seeking revenge, but in remaining steadfast and compassionate, even under ridicule. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob and Lila walked among the warriors, exchanging knowledge about the land, livestock, and survival. Emma helped organize gifts for the tribe's children, her laughter ringing like bells across the valley. The once somber ranch now thrived with energy, camaraderie, and newfound respect, the past week's pain transforming into a foundation for enduring relationships. The young rancher finally allowed himself a smile, wide and genuine. The humiliation that had once defined him now seemed like a distant shadow, a necessary trial that had shaped his resilience. Lila squeezed his hand, whispering, "This is only the beginning, Jacob. Together, we can face anything." Jacob's heart swelled with hope. Love and trust had entered his life at the precise moment he needed them most. By evening, the warriors prepared to leave, promising to return whenever Jacob needed guidance or protection. They mounted their horses, raising their weapons in salute, a tribute to the young man who had faced mockery with courage. The echo of their departure lingered in the valley, a reminder that honor travels faster than cruelty, and that respect can arrive in waves stronger than fear. Jacob watched the horizon, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for months. His ranch was safe, his family secure, and his reputation no longer in the hands of those who had ridiculed him. The valley was alive with promise, a symbol of triumph and hope that the hardest battles sometimes yield the sweetest victories. That night, as Jacob, Lila, and Emma sat under a sky strewn with stars, laughter and music drifting from the distant campfire, Jacob realized. The valley had changed, and so had he. Strength was no longer measured by the size of one's herd or the force of one's fists, but by the courage to stay true to oneself, to protect the vulnerable, and to act with integrity even when alone. Finally, Jacob leaned back against the porch railing, looking at his home, his sister, and Lila. A week ago, he had been humiliated, feeling powerless and alone. Now, he was respected, surrounded by allies, and embraced by love. The valley, once a place of shadows and ridicule, had become a sanctuary of honor, courage, and hope. And for Jacob, this was not the end, it was the beginning of a life filled with strength, purpose, and happiness.